I first read this story for Ada Cheng's Pour One Out, January 13th, 2021. The story is called Love, Friendship and Glowworms. And I thought I'd start with the end, and we'll see how we get there. So the glowworms are both actual and metaphorical. My dad used to say that the light at the end of the tunnel was the train coming to hit you, which I think tells you a lot about him. But I think that the tunnel is a metaphor for life, and it's okay if we don't see the light at the end. It means that the tunnel keeps going, and in the darkness, if you take your time and look up, there is always the possibility of glowworms. Now, recently, I watched this really stupid, surprisingly touching, terrible short series on Netflix called Dash and Lily about two teenagers. And they're both about 17, living in New York City, and they're both self confessed weirdos and they read too much, like that's even a thing. And Lily is a biracial girl of half Asian and half European descent. And it's just before Christmas. And Lily is lonely because her parents are out of the country. So, in a desperate attempt to not feel so alone, she leaves a notebook for someone to find in a bookshop. And in this notebook, she writes in a dare for that person to do. Now, along comes Dash, your typical gangly white boy, dirty blonde, floppy hair, slightly too deep, gravelly voice. He seems worldly and mature for his age. So they write each other and they dare each other to do things. And Dash, of course, hates Christmas and Lily desperately loves it. You get the drift. Shenanigans ensue. And I was surprisingly touched by this really wonderfully terrible romantic comedy, and goddamn it if Dash didn't remind me of my first real boyfriend with his dirty blonde floppy hair and too deep, slightly gravelly voice and faux intellectualism. And oh, I was a lot like Lily when I was her age, a biracial girl who didn't really fit in where she lived, a bookish, awkward teenager, and I too fell in love with the idea of someone who didn't really exist, someone who I thought was interesting, intelligent, kind, an intellectual, someone who was certainly more interesting than anyone from the small town I was from. Now, at the end of the story, Dash and Lily meet for some sort of romantic evening in the bookshop, and that's sort of where the story ends. And I wonder what happens for them next. I hope there isn't a sequel, but if there is, I'll probably watch it. I don't recommend it, or I do. I don't know, I can't tell you what to do. So this is where the story of Dash and Lily and my story diverge, but it got me to thinking about the choices we make when we're young that change the direction of our lives and who helps us along the way. So I met this boy, the dirty blonde floppy haired one, and I went to the big city to study. I moved in with said boy. I made a lot of choices knowing that forging this path would disappoint members of my family, aka my father. Now, Lily is so afraid of doing things to disappoint her family that she rarely makes waves, and when she finally starts to make her own decisions, I think she behaves in a really self-centered way. Now, I was never terribly afraid of making waves, or I was, but I did what I wanted anyway. But are we anything but self-centered at 17? Are we anything but self-centered now? Is there any point in dissecting our lives when we were this young? Am I still the same person? And in most instances, I sincerely hope not. But this is just the start of the tunnel, and we may have just turned the first corner. So let's skip ahead a few years in my story. So I'm in the city studying and living with dirty blonde floppy haired fellow, and surprise, it's not going so well. And I knew that the relationship wasn't good anymore, if it ever was to begin with. But I didn't know how to break up with someone who was so desperately in love with me. And anytime we talked about these things that needed to change, he said he would do better, and he would for a week. And with him, he had to be the smartest person in the room. If I had a story, he always had one better. If you had an opinion, you were always wrong. And it wasn't until much later that I realized that, and I learned to recognize the traits of a narcissist and how they contain the people that they are in a relationship with. But I was in my 20s. I didn't know any of that. I was finishing university and I wanted to continue to dance and perform, and with few opportunities in Australia, I was looking at going to the UK to live and dance, and I thought, here is a good opportunity to leave the relationship by leaving the country. And yes, I know, it is a terrible way to break up with someone, but I felt like I had no other choice. I could leave without hurting this person. I didn't have to be the bad guy. But somewhere along the way, I met this other person. someone who lived in a completely different country than the one I was intending to go. And if you know me, you can guess who this foreign gentleman is. And if you don't know me, he's currently sitting slightly off camera. Anyway, this is where the tunnel splits in two. So it was after Christmas and sometime around New Year, two friends and I decided we needed a break. So we rented a small house a few hours outside of Sydney for a long weekend getaway. And here is a picture of the house. I think the house was in the Southern Highlands, and we drove out to the middle of nowhere with everything we needed for the long weekend. And I remember being sad because I'd finally somehow managed to break up with the bad for me floppy haired one, and I was dealing with that emotional fallout of ending a long-term relationship. And also because I was wondering what to do about this foreign fellow I was falling in love with, and he had just left back to his country of residence, and I wasn't sure when I would see him again. Now, my friends and I didn't have any long heart-to-heart conversations. There were no deep and meaningfuls in the middle of the night. We just hung out. Three good friends, reading, eating, napping, swimming. Oh, and here's a picture of me swimming. This weekend was another turn in the tunnel, another step closer to where I am now. And I don't think I had any major epiphanies, but in some ways, major life-changing decisions, major life-changing things were taking place inside me. I was thinking about the sort of person I want to be by thinking about the sort of person I want to be with. Or maybe I'm making all of this up because, hindsight. Anyway, close to the cabin was a series of caves and abandoned tunnels, and one was fairly well known for housing a colony of glowworms. I'd never seen a glowworm. I was really excited for the possibility of glowworms. We thought we would stop on our drive home and explore the glowworm cave, and part of the reason we went to this particular cabin was it was close to the caves, but for a reason I no longer remember, we didn't actually make it to see the glowworms, but I don't actually think that matters. Over the years, there have been more friends and other great getaway cabins, and all of them have the same things in common. A desire to just be together and do, well, not much. It's in these moments of stillness and quiet that I feel the most connected to someone. If I can be in a room with you, on the same couch even, and be relaxed and comfortable, to not have to say anything at all. These are some of the best times in my life, and I found over the years that I crave these moments. These are my points of light in the darkness, the glowworms in the tunnel of life, if you will. So I do really think that the tunnel is a metaphor for life, and it's okay if we don't see the light at the end. It means that the tunnel keeps going, and in the darkness, if you take the time and look up, there is always the possibility of glowworms.